Okay, welcome, Dr. Roby. Thank you for being with us today. The board is pleased to have you as one of the finalists for the superintendency at Grand Rapids Public Schools. We are looking forward to learning more about you this evening. Before we get started, I have a few notes to make you aware of. All candidates have been asked the same questions this evening and will each go through the same process. You will have 15 minutes to provide your prepared presentation responding to our prompt, how can we accelerate learning and close the achievement gap for all learners in GRPS? Then your interview will take place over 60 minutes and include 17 questions. At the conclusion of each of these interviews, there's an opportunity for you to ask any question that you have of the board and provide closing remarks.
Okay.
All right, so
Thank
we'll
you.
let you get started. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again for having me. I'm excited to be back. My presentation, I was asked to do a presentation around the programmatic approach that you would take for closing the achievement gap and accelerating student learning. And so this is going to be kind of an overview of what that looks like because, as you know, closing the achievement gap is a complex and detailed kind of experience. And during a 15-minute window, I don't know that I could fully do it justice, but I'm going to give a great example of what I think would be a appropriate approach for closing the achievement gap. So the question and the opportunity in the district, it's how can we accelerate learning to close the achievement gap for all learners within the GRPS, Grand Rapids Public Schools system. The district has an academic transformation plan, and at present, there is a literacy crisis that is taking place in the state. You have state literacy proficiency that has remained in the lower echelon in comparison to other states across the nation. And this is especially highlighted for students of color around the areas of literacy. In addition to that, there's some urgency as the third grade reading law goes into effect in spring of this year, and that has implications related to what will happen to students who do not measure as proficient at the end of their third grade experience by the M-STEP assessments. I decided to use third grade as the baseline, and it does not mean that the other grades are not as important, but I think because third grade is a measurement that is used, that's the first time that students are formally assessed around their literacy proficiency, but it also speaks to that early childhood experience walking up to literacy in third grade, and then also the implications and what is expected for students after third grade. And so it has implications around younger children and what their experiences would be, how they learn within the GRPS system, how do we approach literacy from the standpoint of early childhood experiences, partnerships with the city, early family education, and what those literacy experiences are. Also the implications of what takes place after third grade. How does this address our high school and middle school students when you talk about depth of knowledge and their experiences with literacy? So you look at your third grade literacy as your one data point, but it also has implications on younger students and older students. And when you think about depth of knowledge, that's recall, thinking, extended learning, higher order thinking skills. For our middle school students, how are they engaging in literacy? What are they dreaming about? And then for high school students, the implications is how is literacy impacting their application towards a literate world? And then finally, related to this particular question, how does third grade literacy impact the district's overall goal of every child being educated, self-directed, and a productive member of society? This is the third grade trend in the district over the past 5 years. And what I did for the school board, I took the liberty, if you look at the last page of the handout, there I blew it up so you could see it. I wasn't sure how big it would show up on the screen, so I wanted to make sure that you were able to see it. There is an academic trajectory over the last 5 years where, excuse me, let me back up. The district has a goal around literacy proficiency. Specifically this year, there's a 10% increase. There's a goal of having a 10% increase related to literacy improvement. But if you look at your trajectory from 2014 through 2019 for the different demographics of the district, you'll notice that the students of color their literacy proficiency has pretty much remained stagnant with a little bit of an uptick for one particular group. And then also between our white students and students of color, you're starting to see expansion of the achievement gap. If I'm going too fast, please also, I'm trying to make sure that I stay within that time frame. All right, what do we know about the achievement gap? The achievement gap is a lot more complicated than just a data measure on an assessment. I want to propose that there are 5 different tenets of the achievement gap, starting with the preparation gap. The preparation gap is how students come to us. That's that early childhood experience where students have a literature-rich or literature deficient background. So how students appear before they even begin school has impact on how students will perform in school. The belief gap is the second contributor to the achievement gap. And what that means simply is, how do students, staff, parents, and larger community believe in students, and what do we instill in students? By our expectations, students rise or fall by our expectations, and what we state about what their ability to learn has impact on how they see themselves as learners. The time gap. The time gap simply means that children who have not had a lot of experiences with literature-rich backgrounds need more time. And how that looks, that means including longer extended day, enrichment experiences, extended school year, so that they have more time in literature-rich environments to kind of help address that gap. The teaching gap. The teaching gap is one of the single most predictors of student achievement from this standpoint. Highly effective teachers, good teachers make for good schools. And teachers, students who benefit from having 2 years or more of a strong, impactful teacher soar no matter what their academic, economic, language background is. And then the final part of the achievement gap is a leadership gap. So I'm not letting myself or others off the hook. From principals to superintendents to assistant superintendents to district leaders, how we provide resources and support also impacts how students do in school. That means resources for students, resources for teachers in their professional development to help develop their experiences. That is also a contributor to the achievement gap. Now, talked about the gap, let's talk about creating a plan. And so also on this document, on the last page, if you just turn over to the final page, I have it laid out in a little bit more detail. This is just a high-level overview of what the plan would include. And I want to make sure that you see that there are plenty of other steps that take place that would go into a plan to not only address the achievement gap, but then how do you accelerate learning. The first thing you want to do is look at your data over a period of time, your trend data. So you start with your 3rd grade cohorts and see how they do at other mile markers, 5th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade SATs. That's an indication of the strength of your program around literature. Providing ongoing professional development, that means time for curricular writing among teacher teams, vertical alignment with literacy as the base across teaching teams, across content areas is extremely important. The wraparound outreach, and that's a whole community approach. How do you look at leveraging partnerships with the city, early childhood programs, ECFE, which is early childhood family education, ECSE, which is early childhood special education, reading corps, all of those things to help make a literature-rich community. And there's other things that take place within there. Aligning policies and resources, that means putting resources through professional development, through literacy coaches, through finances to ensure that you have a literature-rich background so that your teachers are allowed to get trained and provide those additional resources. Investments in classroom libraries, and I'll talk about that a little bit on my next slide, but all of those things, those resources to make sure that you have a literature-rich background within your school systems are important. And then the final thing about the plan is creating programs, and I'm going to give an example of a program that you could create that would programmatically address accelerating learning, and also closing the achievement gap. This particular program that I'm suggesting is windows, mirrors, and doors. And it's a metaphor for how students see themselves engaged in literacy. And so the window is the development of how students see the wider world and how they fit in. A mirror is the reflection of students' own experiences and community back in the literature. So making sure that they have texts that reflect their experiences, or authors that reflect their background in history. In this district, I am aware that there was a commitment by the district and in the schools to purchase libraries, classroom libraries, specific around the environment or the backgrounds of all of the students at the elementary level. I think that's a strong commitment around having a program that reflects students in their community, to be able to see themselves and hear their stories within their community. And then finally, the door is using the writer's imagination that allows students to step into a created world or an existence that allows them to kind of see the world in a different way. Learning is accelerated and meaningful when it's connected to really lived experiences, creating cultural and intellectual legacy, and connecting to a child's community is key. It's also important when you look at a windows, mirrors, and doors program, it's about the absent narrative, specifically around environments where community members or groups of folks have been marginalized or stories have not been told. And that has to be represented in a curriculum, in a strong curriculum. And what the next slide is some examples of what you might see in a windows, mirrors, and doors curriculum program. To address the achievement gap and to accelerate learning for all, the literacy gap has to be addressed. The experience of having an early childhood, literature-rich background cannot be dismissed. So thinking about how do we address the achievement gap from a programmatic place and accelerate learning, it has to be literature-rich. It has to be engaging for students at all levels. There has to be community outreach. So it's not just what students do when they come to school, it's what they do when they're outside of school, and how are we building programs through literature outside of our school programs. The example I will use is the Michelle Obama book, Becoming, and then the companion book for a toddler, which is I Looked Up to Michelle Obama. So you can have a parent-child kind of connection between their, obviously the text will be very different, but it gives the children the experience of, I'm reading something similar to my mother or my grandmother or my father. Ensuring that all children have quality core instruction using the pre-K-12 Michigan language arts standards is key. And the final thing that I'll say related to this, using culturally responsive and engaging resources to support learning and academic standards. Literacy is the key to open the door to the world for children. When you have engaged students, and you see examples of engaged students at all different levels, engaged students in literacy means engaged students in school. Are there questions that I can answer?
Stopping the timer. Sorry.
We're not allowed.
Okay. All right. I will just say also what I gave you was a companion article related to the third grade trajectory around literacy and its impact for high school students, specifically at 10th grade, and then also at graduation. I thought that this was, it went along well with the presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you. So we will have follow-up questions throughout the interview time. Okay. So that is why we are refraining from questions now. But we will jump right into that time, and I'm going to set the timer. Our first question, we'll give you a moment. Okay.
All right, I'm ready.
Our first question for you is, what did you find most interesting about your visit to our buildings? What was your impression of what you saw and heard? Please be honest and direct with the good and possibly not so good.
Sure. I will say I was very impressed with the buildings that I had an opportunity to visit today. I visited an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. And prior to that, my husband and I, we did a tour of the district, kind of seeing some different buildings, and I was really impressed with just the presentation of how the buildings looked. I know that many of the buildings are under construction right now, and I was like, okay, I can see where the district is going with this. What I was impressed with, as I talked with the 3 building principals, each of them had a problem of practice that they were working through with their staff this year. And I thought that was really important from the standpoint that they are educational leaders. They're thinking about what is something that is taking place within their schools and how are they engaging their staff around that particular problem of practice and what kind of the work that moving forward that they are planning to do. So I thought that was really a very strong statement to those educational leaders. I also had the awesome opportunity to talk with students today. I had high school students from each of the high schools, including the theme schools, the comprehensive high schools, and the alternative education high schools. And their questions were challenging and tough and very pointed. And I appreciated that they had thought about, what does this look like and what am I going to do? And they, asked me, what are you going to do about this particular issue? And I thought that was kind of fun. So I appreciate the engagement. An area that I heard over and over in conversations as I met with different stakeholders was similar to what you all asked me about 2 weeks or a week and a half ago, and that was with respect to the theme schools versus the neighborhood schools and a sense of unequal representation around how they're presented to the larger community and what resources are available to the larger community. So that's something that I've heard consistently.
How would you determine the strengths, capabilities of key administrative staff? Please also share how you might approach the difficult task of restructuring, reassigning, or releasing individuals as necessary.
I think it's important when you're talking about your admin team, your leadership team, to look at what their goals are, having conversation around those goals. I believe in having goals not just related to achievement, but also related to their leadership walk and also process goals, having discussions around how they're getting that work done, who are they including in that work, and then having a timeline of meeting with your admin team, your building principals, your cabinet members throughout the school year to help support those goals and also do a check-in as to their progress related to those goals. With respect to reassigning and releasing people, having conversations about what people are interested in, I think, is helpful when you're talking about reassigning. Sometimes you find out that people are misplaced. A high school principal may be better suited at the elementary level or vice versa. Having conversations about what their experiences are, I think, is an opportunity to kind of decide where people are going to make their best fit. With respect to releasing staff members, that's always a challenging decision. It's never something I take lightly. I believe in providing coaching for folks, being very honest around what their work is, with what I'm expecting, providing coaching and support. And then sometimes if it is not a match, and sometimes that does come into play, allowing them to leave the organization with dignity, I think is really, really important.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Think about one or two of the most difficult initiatives that you have implemented as an educational leader, and then discuss how you built consensus around those initiatives, and it helps to give us some examples.
Okay. I have an example. I'm working through it right now. Our district has recently adopted a new math curriculum, and it's at the secondary level. Well, we're actually doing it at both levels, at elementary and also at the secondary level. But in particular, the secondary level, it's been quite a bit of a challenge from the standpoint of it's a paradigm shift of how people have taught math in the past. We have gone through the process from a protocol and process standpoint of, looking at math curriculums to make sure that, one, are they aligned to state standards? And we got buy-in from teachers, we piloted the programs, and we made a decision as a group based around teacher recommendation about which math program we were moving forward. And now that we're kind of living in that particular math program, it has been a challenge around teachers facilitating, and I don't want to name the program because I don't know if that's necessarily important, but they're not doing that direct teaching, they're more facilitating of the math, and there has been a level of frustration for teachers, and I would even say for students. What I have done, I have actually reached out to the math company, and they are meeting with us in the next week around this, and it's not just myself, it's my director of mathematics, some teacher leaders at each of the school sites, and the building principals to have a conversation around what additional professional development we need to have in place so that teachers are able to feel successful as we go into year 2 of this particular math program. And I would say that has been a recent challenge related to the implementation of a program. You have a plan, but then when you're living through it, it's like, okay, this is where you need to make some adjustments around that plan.
Thank you.
What processes do you use to gather feedback on programs or initiatives? Can you give us a recent example of how you gathered feedback, for what purpose, and most importantly, what you did with the results?
Okay, so I won't use the example I just gave. I got another one. The process, whenever we bring forward a new initiative, I think it's important to ask for teacher voice or stakeholder voice, depending on who is the forward-facing person or persons who are going to be using that particular program or initiative, and have them be included in the process as we are looking at one program versus another. I think it's in what I have done and what I've instilled in my district is that we try to pilot a program at least for a period of time before we make a decision around it, because whenever you're looking at a program and you might be working with vendors, it all sounds great and you want to make sure how is it going to manifest itself in your district with your students and your population. I think that's really, really important. So kind of walking through a process of piloting it and then deciding to bring it forward for adoption. We bring it to the school board and our district curriculum advisory group to say this is what our steps are. And how we evaluate it, it's through professional development. We make sure that we have structures in place as we roll out any sort of curricular program. We have professional development, that initial professional development before the school year begins, and then also plans professional development throughout the school year. So teachers have had an opportunity to kind of dive into the curriculum and then work with it and kind of, maneuver it a little bit, and then having additional professional development once the school year is underway. And their questions around the work looks very targeted because they've kind of experienced it a little bit, making sure that that's in place. Other supports that I make sure that we include are our instructional coaches are trained so that they're an additional resource for teachers between district professional development days and having some support throughout the school year in between times. Every professional development day, every time we lead a learning academy, we ask for feedback through survey data. We've done focus groups with teachers around particular programs to get feedback around how something is going or not. And that's how we kind of adjust up or decide we need to have more supports in a particular grade level or a particular school. So we ask for feedback to see what people are needing. And then the final thing is, what is our data looking like at the end of, and I'll use literacy, we are a Lucy Calkins district. at the elementary level, and we look at our end of unit assessments to see how students are doing, and then through our PLCs have conversations around what the curriculum, the work of the curriculum and how they've had to adjust and what supports that they need. So that's kind of our process, or the process that I've developed.
What is the one thing you would protect, no matter the objections, if there was a need to make budget reduction recommendations to the board?
I would try to protect programs that affected students in school sites. And, I can't say I would call out like this one thing, but I would look at when you're talking about cuts, how can you keep cuts away from classrooms? And where can we be creative around other ways to massage some of those things? And that would be the area that I would try to protect first, is how the supports and things that are taking place in classrooms and at schools. That's not always popular, but that would be kind of the area that I would look to first to protect.
Under what circumstances would you consider eliminating an extracurricular or co-curricular program, and have you had to do this in the past? Conversely, are there any such programs that you advocated for expanding, and why?
Always the issue with cutting programs is the fear that you won't be able to have them back, I think. From my perspective, when you are looking at cutting an extracurricular or a co-curricular program, you want to look at who's involved. I mean, is it a program that there's a lot of participation? And if there is, then what other avenues can we leverage with partnerships with community organizations or the city to keep that program in effect? It may look a little different if it's in partnership with another organization outside of the district, but there's ways to kind of work around that. With respect to have I had to cut programs, I try not to. And one of the programs that always seems to kind of rise to the top are the arts, specifically music programs. And I am a music mother. My baby boy, who is a senior in college, and I shared this earlier, he's been in the band the entire time, from early elementary all the way through marching band at Central State. And so from a parent's perspective, I can appreciate that's the thing that has kept him hooked into school. And he's always been a strong student, but his passion has been around music. And that's why he wanted to stay, wanted to be in school and stay engaged. So I understand that. And so on a personal level, I always have a heart for the kids who have another kind of entry point for school, and they use sports or the arts or some other kind of avenue to stay connected. And when that has been an issue, when I was a principal, I partnered with the city and wrote some grants to have a community partner come in and teach lessons after school when we weren't able to keep our music program as strong as what we would have liked. And then we also were able to add a violin program specifically, and this was a Northside school, where we were able to add a violin program for kids who had never experienced the violin. And we started with our first graders and continued to kind of build up through our program. So again, if you have to cut, I always try to look for, okay, I don't have money over here, but where can I be creative and find resources and partnerships with other organizations?
Please help us to understand how you have engaged the local community and government in your capacity as an educational leader. Also, throughout this process and throughout the day, what have you learned about our community?
Okay. How have I engaged the local community, and what have I learned about GRPS?
Yes, how have you engaged the local community and government where you currently are? And then throughout today's process, what have you learned about our community?
Okay. So I've had very positive relationships with local community and government. We have a strong partnership with the city of Richfield and Mayor Maria Reagan Gonzalez. She is the first Latina mayor in the nation, from my understanding. And and she's been a wonderful partner with our school district. We actually last year did a book launch and talking about the windows, mirrors, and doors. We co-sponsored a program with our sixth graders around Green Card Voices for Youth. And this was specifically around high school students who were immigrants and undocumented students and their stories. And we read that throughout our community, and our mayor, our city council members were in partnership with us and were reading this as part of our literacy plan. And so that's kind of a small example. With other issues where we've engaged the community, with legislators, I work very closely with our state legislators around our platform, specifically related to safe and supportive schools, unfunded mandates, and oftentimes districts, the state will give mandates around, you have to have this program, you have to have this program, but they don't always support it. And so trying to get more clarity around how does that look and how do we support those programs. Also with cross-subsidy with special education and ELL services specifically, where the state also only funds to a certain percent. It's usually around 60 or 70%, and then districts are expected to kind of fill in the gap, but there has not been necessarily an increase in this current biennium related to funding. And so, being an advocate for my district and also in partnership with other districts in the area as we meet with legislators around, these are the things that we are needing. So I think those are some examples on a more broader level of when I've had partnerships with local government. With specific to Grand Rapids, I actually had the opportunity to meet with your city manager, Dr. Washington, and he and I had a really rich conversation about the partnerships, the city public-private partnerships, and some of the things that he was thinking about with the district. And I thought it was just a really robust conversation, and I was really excited about some of the things that he was talking about and was planning for the future. And so that was just kind of, a small conversation, but I was excited behind the energy related to that.
Regarding special education, how do you create an effective environment of inclusion while also meeting distinct needs of all students?
So with special education students, I take the approach that they're general education students first, which means that they need to have exposure and access to the general education program and curriculum. With that, that's kind of their base. They are general education students first and foremost. They have individual education plans, IEPs, that require that you have to do additional services or supports for them. And it's important that they're exposed to their grade level content, but then also we're differentiating and making sure that they are exposed, getting their needs met through smaller class sizes or push-in model or pre-teaching things. So when you talk about inclusion, I like to see our special education students, whenever possible, be pushed into their general education classroom with a co-teacher, and that co-teacher and the general ed teacher working together around curriculum practices. I shared this with another group. I began my career as an inclusion teacher. I was a third grade inclusion teacher and was paired with a special education teacher, so that's how I learned how to do that. And I do believe when co-teaching is done well, between a special education teacher and the general ed teacher, or an ELL teacher and the general education teacher, the students don't know the difference between who's getting support or not, because the teachers are in alignment on how they present the curriculum and their expectations, and they're co-teaching together, and that requires that they're planning together, that they're looking at all their students' data. They're looking specifically at the students that they're working with, of course, for our ELL teachers and our special education teachers, but they're also looking at what are their grade level peers doing and having conversation around that. And then when you're talking about inclusion, they should also be included in those PLCs, because that's where the planning takes place. So that all kind of builds into what kind of experiences our special education students will have when they enter classrooms.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Roby, during your career as an educator, can you let us know what you've specifically done to address and maintain a focus on staff morale for teams that you've led?
Maintain a focus on staff morale.
Yes.
That's important. As you are building community with, you expect teachers to build community with their students. As a educator, as a leader, I have to also be responsible for building community with the staff and encouraging building principals to build community and relationship with staff. When you talk about morale, celebrations, I think, are huge. We don't often in education celebrate enough. We often look at what we're not doing right. We look at test scores, we look at discipline data, but we don't also take the time sometimes to celebrate what has gone well. And so I think celebrations are huge. Also around community within your buildings or your district, sharing good news. People like to know what other folks are doing, and making sure that there's no secrecy around, oh, this particular school, look at them, they've increased their achievement by this percent to that percent. Other things that build staff morale, doing fun things. In our staff, with my staff, and this may seem a little hokey, so as I say it, it was fun. We did, I thought it was fun. And actually the staff, I think, thought it was fun too. We did The Amazing Race. And what that is, and I don't know, the TV show The Amazing Race, where you have all these different, we did it around our community. And so we were in teams, and we put people in teams that wouldn't necessarily work together or connect, and they had different things that they had to do within an hour's time, and going to the fire department, going to the bakery, going to this particular school. And it's amazing how competitive people can get. And the reward was that we would sub in their classroom for an hour, where it was just an hour. They didn't have to do anything other than, let's set a date and time. And so people really wanted that reward. And so, and those are some things that kind of boost morale, and also, taking time to share good news. In my leadership team, one of the things that we do is share positive stories. It can be personal stories with, what's going on with your family, or an achievement that you've had with your team, or a school that you're working with. So sharing those positive stories also build morale.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about one of the most stressful situations you have experienced as an educational leader, and how do you handle personally stressful situations?
A stressful situation, it was actually a very tragic situation in my district, where we had the death of 2 students and their father, and because it was a elementary girl, her middle school brother, and her father, and then the mother did not die, but was very seriously injured. I think it was stressful from the standpoint of, you're dealing with death at an elementary level and a middle school level, putting systems in place to make sure you have strong communications with the school site and support and resources for the site with counselors and social workers. And then also trying to manage, because often with these type of tragedies, you're trying to get accurate information so that you can report out to your community appropriately. But then you have social platforms where people are kind of talking ahead of you and saying things on Facebook and such, and, you know, trying to be proactive in communication and not responding to different things that you don't necessarily know are true or not. And so that can be a lot to manage. And this particular situation happened on a Friday afternoon. And so we were fortunate that we were able to convene our team on Saturday and Sunday to kind of create a plan of action going into that Monday at those particular school sites, and then also informing the other schools. So we had 2 schools that it directly impacted, but then there's always siblings and cousins and other people at other schools, and making sure that those school administrators and school secretaries had that information as well. And so I think that would be probably one of the more stressful situations, because you're dealing with, the human emotion, the sadness, the tragedy around the death, but then also you have to kind of go into a technical kind of, what are the systems to make sure that we're supporting school sites and managing communication around that. And I'm sorry, Reverend
And so
Matthias,
how
said-
do you personally handle stress?
I have a great support system, and personally, how I handle stress, I begin with prayer for me, and I believe in that. I start my day actually every morning walking through the Bible on my app. I have an app on my phone, and that's something that I do to kind of ground me. In addition to that, I have a great support system. My husband and I are best friends. He thinks he's a comedian. But he keeps me laughing, and so and I think it's important with these types of position, you have to have life-work balance. So I have things that center me, but then I also have people around me that can make me laugh, and we have fun and things like that. And I think it's important. I also encourage my staff to do things that make them laugh and kind of take some of the stress around the work that they're doing away, because these jobs can be stressful at times, but they're very rewarding. But you have to have the balance. If you're able to stay healthy, you've got to be able to figure out some different stress relievers. And then I also exercise. That's something I have committed to this year, where I am going to the health club to kind of get those endorphins going every morning. So those are kind of the areas that I use for balance.
Excellent. It'd be great if we could all do that. How will you ensure high educational standards are set, clearly communicated, and met?
It's important as a superintendent, working very closely with district cabinet to set goals around academic standards. You want to include the voices of your admin team, your building principals, setting those goals. And so making sure that that's communicated to them through staff meetings, through team meetings, through one-on-one meetings around their leadership development. I talked a little bit, about when you're working with building principals, making sure that they have not only an achievement goal, but a leadership goal that helps kind of hold them to that standard of what that work looks like. Communicating to your broader community, I love to do, because then that holds you accountable. I think it's important when you're saying this is our goal of 10% increase in ELA standards or math standards, making sure that that's communicated broadly so people can hold you to that work. And then as far as meeting those standards, you don't just set the goal and you don't look at it again till the goal expires. It's what are the systems in place, and you talk about your data cycle. So you have your goal, and then you have data points of when you're going to measure that goal. If you're talking about district goals around student achievement, that may mean looking at data points using NWA assessments, end of unit assessments, those kind of things throughout the course of the school year to see how closely you are to obtaining those goals.
Thank you very much.
Okay. How does a superintendent ensure that athletics and the arts are utilized to support the whole child and are also educationally based?
As I kind of mentioned before, I think it's important that both the arts and athletics are part of a robust program. It's everybody, as much as we want to, and as an educator, I want to think that everybody wants to come to school to get better at science or math or social studies, but sometimes the hook is a little different for different kids, and so you have to have different on-ramps for young people, and that may mean the arts or athletic programs. It also, when you talk about the whole child or that it's educationally based, it starts at the elementary level and having a strong articulation all the way through. So elementary through club sports, after-school programming, and then when they get to middle school, AAU teams, middle school combined teams, and then also feeding into the high school programs. What I noticed about your district, and I learned this today, with some of your smaller high schools, students are able to participate in sports at some of the larger high schools, and I thought that was kind of awesome. That builds a sense of community. So just because you might be at a targeted magnet school that may not have a particular sport, you can participate in another school that offers that sport. So I thought that was a really strong commitment to that. And again, educationally based, your coaches should be included in professional development where it's appropriate, training around how do you differentiate, how do you engage all learners. And when I think about coaching in particular with sports, every child is going to develop at a different time, and it's important that the coach coaches from the positive, just like you would expect a classroom teacher to teach from the positive. It doesn't mean that you don't give feedback around performance, but you should do it in a way where students can be encouraged and want to try harder versus just hearing negative feedback related to that. And so that would be a way to kind of support it from an educational base. With the arts in particular, again, I'm a arts mom. I think starting at the elementary where kids develop their love for the arts or even the willingness to kind of explore, having robust programs with musicals and entry-level arts programs and building them all the way through your system, making sure that you have access to them at both elementary, middle, and high school is important to build a strong program.
In your judgment, what are the 3 most critical things a good principal does?
Having been a building principal, I would say the 3 most important things, they have to be visible in their building and in their classrooms. Students should know their building principal, and they shouldn't just know them if they're the students who are sometimes who challenge us behaviorally. They should know the kids who, that's the nicest way I can say it. I don't want to say, the naughty kids, but they should know their building principal and have a relationship with the building principal. And I think that the principal needs to make an effort to connect with their students and be visible within the classroom. It's important that building principals are educational leaders. They need to understand what curriculum is and what good teaching is and what it is not, and also to be able to support their staff around that. And I look for principals who are able to coach their staff, give feedback that is meaningful. So not just to say, you know, you did a good job, but this is where I saw you engage your students, or I liked how you asked this higher level thinking question, and then you challenge your kids to go deeper. So giving them very specifics, you know, around their curricular practices and instructional practices. And the third thing that I would look for a strong principal, you have to be an advocate for your program. You know, how are you championing your program to the district, to the larger community? Why would someone want to come to your particular school? Are you a cheerleader for your program? And when you're out and about in the community talking about the good work that is taking place at your school or new programs that you're initiating, so people want to take a closer look around what's taking place at your program.
How do you provide the oversight and or lead others who have the direct responsibilities in a district in this size? And specifically, how do you hold others accountable for delivering the mission of the district?
Oversight and delivering mission of district. You said something else too. I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of it.
How do you provide the oversight and or lead others who have the direct responsibility in the district this size? Specifically, how do you hold others accountable for delivering on the mission of the district?
Thank you. Setting goals, and I kind of talked about that a little bit, and being very clear with people around these are the goals. I don't believe in micromanaging people. I think that it's important to give people the opportunity to lead. We do it in consultation though, so I don't just say, okay, we're setting a goal and I'll check you out, 6 months from now. But it's important to have conversation with your leaders, and this is the work that I have done both in Minneapolis and also currently in Richfield, where people who have direct leadership over a particular department, we have conversations around what their work is. We talk about their goals, what things they may be struggling with, and how I can provide support or how I can connect them with another director or another person who can offer some resources. So it's a continual conversation around what that work looks like. And for a district this size, I don't think it changes. It becomes, just broader to manage, making sure you have touch points with each of those departments or the people who are leading that and having conversation around what that work looks like. And the mission of the district, delivering the mission of the district. Well, everything that we should do should start with the mission of the district. And that's kind of the starting point, and figuring out the specific goals in ELL or special education or gifted and talented. How does that measure up to the overall district mission and vision? But I do believe in allowing people to lead, because these are smart people, and I trust that you understand what your work is, but we're going to be in consultation around what that work is and having check-in points around their goals. At present, with my teaching and learning team, we meet as a whole team weekly and talk about goals, and then also I meet individually one-on-one with them once a month around their specific goals of the areas that they directly supervise. And that's a nice way for me to check in as to what's going on, where can I provide some support and guidance, and then where I can offer some redirection if appropriate. Also, I do companion learning walks with my team. So as they go on their site visits to work with schools, I sometimes tag along and just kind of listen to the conversation. So when I'm working with them one-on-one about their leadership, I can give them some insight and feedback related to how they're guiding the work at their school sites.
If we were to ask your direct reports or administrative team to describe your qualities or characteristics in 3 adjectives, what would they say?
They would say I'm collaborative. I believe in engaging others in their voice and asking their expertise. I don't have to be an expert at everything, and respecting that people have different experiences than mine and asking for their advice and opinion and how do we do this work together. I think I would be described as equity and outcomes driven. I set goals around the work, and then I also tie them to outcomes. So it's not just we're going to set a goal and then not have any sort of measurement of what that work looks like. And the final thing I think that they would say is I'm pretty strategic. I try to plan and look at kind of what the plan is, where our stop gaps, what could possibly go wrong, and kind of have a plan for the plan. And so those would be the things that I would say.
So you have had a marathon today. I feel like we've had a marathon, but not as long as you. So this is your last question for the evening, and that is, do you have any questions for us?
My gosh. This has been, and I will say, this has been an awesome day. It has been a marathon, but I have truly, truly enjoyed it. And this is a wonderful district. You have very strong educators, very passionate educators, and you have to know that that as I've gone and talked to different people, their questions have been, some of them have been kind of tough, and I think that's important, but they've always, I think that they were very reflective on, how is she going to match our needs? And so I'm appreciative of that. I would say my question for this board would be, based on some of the things that your community has shared over this last cycle, what would be the top 1 or 2 things that you would like me, if I'm selected, to focus on to consider this a successful start?
I would say plan to be here for a while, so that way.
Okay.
And I mean, it sounds like it's obvious, but really I think that the work, there isn't really much 100-day work to do. It's more long-term work, and I think that you could do some good 100-day work. But I think that, I think that you've identified the challenges of the district around the equity issues, especially, real and perceptive wise in terms of the theme and the night. We want to create a district where all the kids can have the capacity to go to college if they want to, and so that's implementing plans that move us towards that. Connections with community, special ed. I think that those are all things that, but I really don't think that we have anything that needs a quick fix. I think that what we have are laying the foundations to move forward and to move on. And I think that you have a great community to work with, as you learned today, and a great board to work with to do that.
I think the idea too that you take time to get to know us and to know the cabinet and to listen to the cabinet about where they've been and where they want to go. And I think you've already found that we have some outstanding leaders and teachers and principals and good people working in our district. And my impression of this district is that almost every person that I talk to, whether it's a teacher or a principal or somebody in the cabinet, everybody wants to do what's right, and it works down to what's best for kids.
I think that the superintendent role in this city, as in every city, is critical. Few people have a unique opportunity to impact, domino effect 17,000 lives. imagine the impact that that produces in a decade. And so realizing that, including the staff are forever changed too. Kids change staff's lives. And so to realize that, I think for us as a board, as Dr. Baker alluded, we're not looking for a quick fix. We're really looking for a person that will partner with this district and continue the positive changes that we're seeing. I think you're right. You have in these folks an investment too. They're looking for a person to invest in them, but they're also looking to invest in producing for themselves a good workplace, but also impacting this city. And so I would hope that would happen in the person that we choose.
I would say that we really need someone who is intentional and committed to make sure all the students in our district have access and opportunity.
Anyone else? Well, I want to reiterate, as a leader, if selected, you will find me outcomes and equity driven. I am very collaborative. I do believe in achievement for all. My career has suggested that that is my work. It's not something that I take lightly. I want all children in the community to do well, because I believe that if all of our children do well, then the community only benefits from that. I am not interested in a fly-by-night kind of position. I want to be here in Grand Rapids. I have researched your district and have thought very long and hard about this being a great match for me as far as who I am as a person and the work that you all are doing, and to continue to build upon that. I am excited and honored that I was invited back. I think, this is an awesome community and I would love to be a part of it. And I hope that my leadership and the work that conversations that I've had with your community, that has shown through. And so I do appreciate and thank you for the opportunity just to come back and share a little bit more about myself.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.